In June of 2019, we covered the story of Dylan Groves, an alleged survivor of
Alleged?
Alleged?
Alleged.
What did I say?
You said alleged.
Did I? Did I say alleged?
No.
All
Try
right.
that again.
In June of 2019, we covered the story of Dylan Groves, an alleged survivor of Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory.
It turns out this is the episode we get the most correspondence about, in that every 2 weeks or so, someone will find a video of it on YouTube and comment on it. Tonight,
Or today, depending on when you're listening to it.
we provide you with some of that colour.
Yes, the intolerant Texan writes,
Self-described communist and socialist. I need not listen to any more.
he, I'm assuming it's a he, is referring to only one of us, though. Did he actually listen to the podcast?
I think not. Now, one chip-chap states,
Haven't even listened yet, but by the first few minutes, my guess is these guys are dismissing it.
so hasn't listened yet is listening. What is this one chip-chap? A cat in a box with a radioactive isotope?
I don't know. Should we check?
No. Now, Kit Driscoll writes,
You guys shouldn't speak to things you have no clue about. Or do you? You sound like you're deliberately attempting to discredit these atrocities while making profit off of it.
oh yes, we're really rolling about in that snuff dough. Bought my second luxury yacht with that snuff dough. Snuff dough.
Yes, Alexei Paquin comments,
I watched this girl's videos years ago. It's so important to have intelligent people like you talking about this. It makes it more than a story and brings more credibility to this.
I don't think she listened to the episode.
Oh, she listened. Now, Truth is Key had the following to say.
Do people really listen to these guys? They spend a lot of time talking about nothing. Get to the damn point. There's a cannibal restaurant in California. You get to meet your meat before you eat them. Look it up.
We've both been to Milliways, don't you worry.
And finally, Cat D writes,
You two have no idea what you're talking about, not a freaking clue.
finally a comment we can agree with. Roll the theme. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Addison and Dr. M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. I am Josh Addison, they are Dr. M. Dentith. We are sitting here in a chilly Auckland. Is that brandy? Was it delivered to you by a St. Bernard with a cask around its neck?
It's the standard whiskey.
Yeah, that's not really suitable for the chilly conditions we have here in
No, but
Auckland.
it's got a port cask finish.
I don't know what that means.
Well, it tastes like a shipping dock. You know, it tastes of cables and oil and steel truncheons and dock workers. You know, it's just it's full of dock worker goodness.
It's pretty much what I've always thought of whiskey. Yes, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand, the night after the blood moon.
Dun dun. Actually, we've got a bottle.
We do have a dun dun dun
But
sound effect,
unfortunately,
both your hands are busy as you get yourself liquored up for what's to come, I suppose.
I was so sure you were going to say get liquored up for Christmas, but no.
Yes, so this week we're going back. We're going back to an old topic, and the reason we're going back is kind of out of morbid curiosity, really. I think because it's a topic that it kind of turns out we're the only people talking about, apart from those who actually believe in it.
Yeah, so we covered Uncle Snam's. I'm
How much of that have you drunk already?
About one drop.
Well, obviously it's a drop too many.
So we covered Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory back in June of 2019. That's episode 224 for those of you who are managing to keep count. And if you are, you've got the numbers wrong because our numbering system is not correct in any way, shape or form. And we have, as the intro intimated, got correspondence about this from time to time. And we think that every single person, apart from Dylan Groves, who is aware of this theory, has been in contact with the podcast to tell us that we're morons.
And the reason we think that is because basically, yeah, if you go looking for information on Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, apart from the videos of the person who first talked about it, we're pretty much all there is, and that doesn't seem right because we're nobody.
And this is actually kind of weird from my perspective because we actually might be drawing attention to a conspiracy theory which is unwarranted and the kind of thing that probably doesn't need to be disseminated. But at the same time, it's also a very good example of a particular kind of conspiracy theory. And I guess we also want the attention.
I guess we do.
From the 8 or so people
honest,
who know
yeah.
about this topic.
So before we actually get too far into it, should we play the proper chime, and then that way it signals that we're starting the episode properly. And
It's
we can
true,
stop
because
hedging and beating around the bush.
we are professionals. And professionals have chimes, like
Just
this one
like
here.
this one.
Snuff dough.
Yes, no, I can feel it now. It's official. We're properly talking about the topic instead of just pissing about.
So we're no longer talking around the topic,
no.
apart from
I mean,
my
we are,
talking about
right this exact moment, that's what we're doing.
But
So the topic...
we are entering the topic now.
Yes, the topic is Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory.
And not Uncle Snam's Snuff Factory.
That's a different one.
Or Uncle Snam's Snuff Factory, which is... Actually, I can't really remove the N.
No.
Suff? Uncle Snam's Suff Factory.
Sure. Now, although we are being quite flippant about it to begin with, that's mostly due to, I think, the conversation that's gone on around it. The topic itself makes for some fairly grim reading or listening in this particular case. We'll get into the exact details of it, a bit of a recap, I suppose, for those who went around for the first time shortly. But
there is a lot of new data.
There is, yep, there's more to say. But yeah... The weird thing is, if you go to Google and type in Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, 7 of the first 10 results, when I did it, were this podcast or links to it. There was what I assume was the original Reddit thread that first got you onto the topic. There was one guy who mentioned it in a comment on one of his Instagram pictures.
Okay, I should point out, it wasn't the Reddit thread that got me into it, it was an email. Someone emailed me about it.
Right.
And now I no longer have that email, but I was emailed about this. So there was one other person who thought they should draw it to our attention. That person believed the theory, so it wasn't a fan of the show going, oh, you people should talk about this. This was someone who wanted to spread the word about the theory, possibly to the wrong people.
Possibly.
A little like the time that David Icke's PR person got in contact saying, you deal with conspiracy theories. Want to promote David Icke's show? Okay, so sure, if we can get him on it.
And so since it seems like we're the only people actually looking into this in any great detail, on a podcast anyway, I guess, we should do it some more and see what happens.
But first we should talk about the Internet Movie Database.
We should, yeah, because... when I Googled Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, the first hit was, I think, a link to the podcast on one of the various podcasting services. And then I think it was either the second or the third was a link to that, an entry for that episode on the IMDb, Internet Movie Database. And I thought, that's
Movie database.
I thought they do everything these days, I think. I thought that's a bit odd. I guess, does the IMDb, because, we put our podcast up on Podbean, the site where it's hosted, and then it immediately shows up on iTunes and Stitcher and all that, because everybody just scrapes everybody else's feeds.
Syndicated, there's scraping going on. But you think it's something slightly more than that?
And so I assumed that, I guess IMDb does the same thing. But I went along and had a look anyway, and it sure enough has all of our episodes there, and which could just be from a robot scraping our feed. That could be easily done. But then I looked at the cast page, and it lists the two of us. It lists everyone we've ever had as a guest and what they do. It lists my children with the title of Josh's Children. In fact, it lists, I think, everyone who's ever been on this episode except Drew.
Oh, now that's
It's been a long time
interesting.
since we had Drew on, but still, we had him more than once. And so that seemed to be the sort of information that you could only get from actually listening through each podcast episode.
And apparently not liking Drew. Because, as you point out, every single person aside from Drew.
All of the academics with their titles and what they were doing here. David Icke, obviously. And yeah, so that either they've got some really good AI that actually scans through the whole episode, and
At
is
which
able to
point
pick out
we have to
salient
work out
details.
what is it about Drew's life he's able to escape the system. Is this an enemy of the state situation, Drew? Are you doing a Will Smith? Do you have a blender?
Or a very dedicated person
Who doesn't like Drew?
who is unknown to us is going through the IMDb. I put in the name of a couple of other local podcasts, and they didn't seem to have an entry. So possibly we have a dedicated fan who's keeping our IMDb entry, which they created, up to date in meticulous detail.
And I suspect we will know whether that's the case if within the next week or so Drew suddenly appears in the cast notes.
Yes, we'll have to see.
Oh, the story gets more and more intriguing as time goes by.
Enough about us. Enough about, and indeed, most of the comments that talk about the previous episode start by saying, why do these guys go on about so much rubbish before they start to... And the answer is because this is a podcast. Have you never listened to any podcast? It always starts with the hosts rabbiting on about bollocks before they actually get into the...
Especially when the podcast hosts are in their 40s and have a long-standing friendship, and thus use this as an excuse to spend time together because of their very, very busy lives.
So busy.
Actually, my life isn't really that particularly busy now, although it's going to get very busy very soon. But more on that in a later episode.
Anyway, so to the topic at hand, Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory.
How many times have we said to the topic of hand this episode?
Not enough, because we're going to keep saying it. Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory is a story, I guess you could say, promoted by a person on YouTube currently going by the name of Dylan Groves.
Who's an alleged survivor of a child snuff ring in Killeen, Texas, called Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory.
Yes, a government-run facility in which children are abducted, or in some cases are raised in, I think, and then murdered and mutilated in all sorts of horrific ways, and filmed for the purpose of your depraved satanic pedophile types.
Yes. We'll get into the details as to exactly how the system works later on. Now, last time we talked about it, we talked mostly about the theory around Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory. What we didn't talk about was the township that the factory is said to be located in, which is in Killeen, Texas, which is very close to Fort Hood, which is a major military installation. Now, this time around...
Sorry, I don't think that Groves actually identified Fort Hood as the location of Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, did they? I don't think they did, but people immediately said, Killeen, Texas, Fort Hood, that's the one nearby.
Yes, because
so it was identified.
As we're about to find out, there's a lot of oddities.
There's a lot going on in
Fort
Hood and Killeen, Texas, yes.
Which actually, in retrospect, may make sense of some of the theory, given just how weird Killeen, Texas turns out to be. So we'll start with something rather mundane, which was a family saw a UFO in Killeen, Texas back in July 2019.
That's a thing. It doesn't sound directly related to satanic pedophiles, but it's weird.
And also it turned out to be... Well, actually, it did turn out to be an unidentified flying object. It did not turn out to be an alien flying saucer.
Yes, it was eventually identified as a bundle of balloons from a funeral, I think.
Yes, about 50 silver balloons had been released after a funeral. I don't know why. And that was what was spotted in the night skies.
Yes. Now, more seriously, in 2009, there was a mass shooting at Fort Hood, the military base nearby. 13 people were killed and 42 of them were wounded.
Now, if we were numerologists, those numbers would be significant. 13 and 42, unlucky and the meaning of life. I mean, how very coincidental. Coincidence?
Yes. And then Fort Hood itself... I think it's fair to say Fort Hood is possibly suffering from a bit of a leadership issue.
It's certainly got a dead soldier issue.
It's definitely got a dead soldier issue and much more besides. So in an article from 2017, they said Oh no, actually it's more recent though, because it says in the last 5 years from January 2016 to present. So, so this one is actually up to date.
Yeah, this is a blog entry which has been updated over
since.
time.
Yeah, okay, that's my confusion. So in the last 5 years from January 2016 to present, Fort Hood on average lost 33 soldiers a year. That's about 3 soldiers a month.
Now these deaths include suicides and homicides. This isn't just natural causes of people being on base. And my immediate thought was, okay, what's the base rate here? Because we know that military life is not necessarily the kind of life that leads to a person flourishing. We're also aware that in kind of institutional settings, you're likely to get abnormal behavior, including homicides and increased risk of suicide. But it turns out that actually the death rate at Fort Hood is so unusual that there are multiple state and federal investigations going on into the leadership of Fort Hood, because people are going, no, this isn't the normal number of deaths we expect in a military base. This is actually really, really weird. Now, Fort Hood did try to solve this problem with one really, really easy fix.
Which was basically just stopping talking about it.
Yes, so at some point they just stopped releasing press releases about what was going on at Fort Hood, because one way to make a problem disappear is to simply not talk about it. That's how people have managed problems in their families for generations.
Yes.
And look at us now.
Now, some of the earliest comments on our first video about Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory started referencing Vanessa Gillen, and indeed the hashtag Find Vanessa Gillen, which was going around in 2019. 2020. Because, yes, this is a case that, like this one made the news. This one got a bit more attention than the other three soldiers a month dying one way or another around Fort Hood. Private First Class Vanessa Gillen, 20 years old, from Houston, disappeared from Fort Hood in April of last year.
Now, when she disappeared, it was an unusual disappearance because all her belongings were left in the barracks, including her cell phone, which had a message that was sent to US Army Specialist Aaron Robinson, a person who later committed suicide after being identified as a potential suspect in the disappearance of Vanessa.
And then, unfortunately, 2 months later, Private Gillen's remains were discovered and identified not too far away, were they?
No, I think they were either found in the grounds or very nearby the grounds. And these are partial remains. So
yes.
they didn't find all of her, they found some of her.
So, yes, she unfortunately came to a fairly unpleasant end. So in the wake of the investigation into what happened, at least 14 army leaders, including one general, were fired or suspended after an independent civilian review board found systemic leadership failures and a toxic culture at Fort Hood, which seems to be putting it mildly.
Yes, so you've got 3 soldiers a month dying on average. You have someone who was murdered on site, leading to a massive firings of high-ranking army personnel. You can kind of see why people, when they were making comments on our video, were talking about this particular case. But the next case, well, that really takes the biscuit, as they say.
Well, yes, because also Fort Hood soldiers were not too long ago arrested in a child prostitution sting in the Texas town next to the Army base, which I assume is Killeen. So they basically, some soldiers, 3 of them, were arrested August last year, basically for showing up to a location to meet underage girls for sex.
Now, these soldiers were part of a larger ring, so they were the soldier component of a larger child prostitution ring. And yes, they were making plans to meet the girls for sexual acts in exchange for money, drugs, and alcohol.
Yes, so it certainly seems that there's a problem with, would you say discipline, would you say culture in general?
I mean, I'd say generally there's a problem with the military, but in this particular case, I'd say there's a very particular problem with the leadership of this military base.
So knowing all this about Fort Hood certainly gets one's attention when we start talking about a supposed organised snuff factory somewhere in the area.
Well, yes, so I can kind of see why some people, when they listen to that original episode, going, but where's the context, man? Where's the context? All this other weird stuff is going on around Fort Hood and in Killeen, Texas. You're ignoring the facts, man. Well, we're not ignoring the facts.
No.
The thing is, are the stories that we're looking at here in any way related to the idea that there is a industrialized snuff factory operating beneath Killeen, Texas?
Because that was the actual claim, that 45 minutes drive from Austin, Texas.
Which is approximately where Killeen is.
There's an underground facility run by the government to sell children or foodstuffs made from children.
So Soylent Green is people, in this case, young people.
On the black market. There was the idea that the majority of these children were people of colour, and Groves described a lot of went on as a kind of genocide, racially targeted, with white supremacist sort of overtures. Apparently, this is not the only such facility. Other nations have their own snuff factories, and there's just lots and lots of horrible claims about horrible things happening to children in these facilities.
Yeah, so she goes on to some length describing how the children are prepared as foodstuffs and the kind of kitchens they have for serving this foodstuff to other children in there, because it turns out part of the snuff factory is not just creating food from children, but then feeding other children that particular food. That's more interesting with respect to Grove's story, is the idea that some of the children are what they call trauma bonded. The idea that the way that they control people within the system is to bond you via PTSD to another person of a similar age, so that they can control you by threatening the other person.
And there's the idea of a sort of a family structure to it, and that the people involved would get their own children involved as well, to sort of carry it's sort of a generational thing. I should sort of, we're saying Groves at the moment because Dylan is the name they're using currently. They have used other names in the past, and as we'll talk about in a little bit, also claim to suffer from polyfragmented dissociative disorder, and will identify as a variety of other alters in their videos.
Yes. Yeah.
So Groves is, we're not trying to be overly formal there. It's just an easier way of talking about this person.
Now, Josh, where does this evidence come from? If Groves is going to make these claims, and these are fairly bold, extraordinary claims, what's the evidence?
Well, it's all from their YouTube channel. Which...
Oh, no, so, but where have they got the evidence to present on their YouTube channel?
Well, from first-hand experience is their claim.
Claim
that they were a member of one of these families, essentially, a bloodline family, as they're called, but managed to break free from their programming.
But, crucially, only realised this recently, because all of the evidence is from recovered memories. Now, that will probably send a lot of alarm bells ringing in people's minds, because what we've described sounds very much like your standard Satanic Panic from the 80s and early 90s, which also rested on the idea of recovered or facilitated memories, where people were put into situations where they recovered memories of traumatic events which they had suppressed in the past, most of which, and I'm saying most here because even though I suspect almost all of which there may well be some legitimate cases, turned out to be fraudulent.
Yes, I mean, if you're our age, you were around for the first round of Satanic Panic,
and you're probably a podcaster.
And of course, it has to be said that the Satanic Panic type moral panics of the past can trace their roots all the way back to the sort of the Jewish blood libel protocols of the Elders of Zion type stuff. Anyway, there is actually a long history of people claiming that some particular group within society is doing horrible, depraved things to our children. In the past, it was sort of in the Satanic Panic was daycare workers, and there was always some implication that was a bit of a reaction to increasing numbers of women entering the workforce,
Well,
and therefore increasing numbers of children.
You can't have that,
daycare.
Josh. I mean, they'll ask for the right to vote
Yes,
next.
there they are, going off to work, leaving their children in the hands of these monsters. And then, obviously, of course...
Because, I mean, as we know, men can't look after children. They are biologically incapable of looking after anything, including doing their own washing.
Last time I was looking after my children, I literally threw them into the oven. That's not actually true at all. Please don't take away my children, Family Services. No, but obviously, of course, and this kind of became more of a thing after we recorded that first episode. QAnon, obviously, is neck deep in stories of satanic pedophiles sucking the adrenochrome out of children and drinking their blood and what have you.
Actually, Groves has a fairly interesting relationship with the QAnon community.
Well, yes, that's the thing which we'll have to get into because we never really talked about that. Because, I mean, a couple of years, QAnon was very definitely a thing when we first talked about this, but I don't think it hadn't metastasized into its current form as much back then, I don't think.
Bit hard to tell because, of course, the problem is our experience of QAnon here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is very different from the experience about people who have an interest in conspiracy theories have, say, with respect to the US. So QAnon kind of came late to us politically because we are not America. Whilst people who were in the bowels of America, like you would be if you're in Killeen, Texas, probably had more interaction with QAnon if they're looking into theories of this particular type.
Now, Groves refers a lot to Project Monarch, something that they were subjected to and only after a long time were able to free themselves of. Project Monarch is allegedly a spin-off of good old MK Ultra. Now, we know MK Ultra was a thing. There's plenty of documentation to show that is a thing that actually happened. Not nearly as much documentation as there should be, I understand, because it did destroy a hell of a lot of it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like so MK Ultra was a CIA program. You might recall that the CIA also had their so-called enhanced interrogation program, and they ended up producing what was, I think, a 5,700-page report into their enhanced interrogation program. And somehow, before it was meant to be publicly released, they deleted the only copy they had on their servers, which meant there was only a 500-page summary, an executive summary, of the 5,700-page version of the report, which just disappeared. Turns out they only had one copy and it got deleted and it just completely disappeared. So it's not unheard of for the CIA to lose documentation that they really ought not to.
Nevertheless, MK Ultra, which was basically in the 60s when everyone was experimenting with drugs, the CIA was at it as well, and they were looking for there was all sorts of stuff. There was the idea of, can we use it to program people into Manchurian candidate type things?
Can we use it to spy on Russians by sitting in a ranch in Los Alamos and thinking really, really hard about Moscow?
Can we use it to interrogate, to help with interrogations and get people to tell us everything they want?
Can we kill goats with it?
Can we? There was, I'm pretty sure extending life or immortality was one of the other things they wanted to look into. I think they were kind of treating drugs the way people treat computers in 1980s films, as just sort of magical things that can do
anything. Yeah.
But supposedly there was also this Project Monarch, which was basically the satanic ritual abuse branch of MK Ultra, and this one there is not so much evidence for, I gather.
No, in fact, if you look up Project Monarch, there's very little reference to it online at all. It does seem to be the invention of certain people who are claiming, well, you know, MK Ultra was simply the smokescreen for the really, really bad satanic stuff. And in part, this is because this is fairly standard anti-Catholic propaganda. So the Project Monarch stuff was apparently a residual mystery religion that managed to survive the emergence of Christianity. And it kind of rumbled around in the background with people engaging in their mystery religion stuff from the ancient world until Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati got involved, started infiltrating a whole bunch of Freemasonic orders and bringing with them the esoteric mystery religion, which was apparently based upon freedom, equality, and being nice to one another, which are some of the most insidious things a person can possibly suggest to a Christian.
Shocking.
Now, this then rumbled away in the Anglo-Germanic world for quite some time, up until around about World War II, where the Nazis adopted it and made it into behavioural research. Now, of course, after World War II, with the defeat of the Axis powers, this allowed these Satanist mystery religion worshippers to go to the US via Operation Paperclip, because, of course, the Americans swooped in. They took all of the best Nazi scientists they could possibly find, like Werner von Braun's
yes,
and the like, and they brought them to the US and treated them remarkably well. And so these Nazi behavioral researchers who happened to be Satanists and also practitioners of mystery religions were brought to the US, where, of course, they entered the CIA and they developed Project Monarch under the auspices of the CIA. And the whole point is, Monarch is an umbrella term used by the survivors of this particular project, which is why it's probably not the official name of the made-up program at all. It's a name which is used by survivors because it describes the transformation of the individual as the survivor recalls it. So the whole point of Project Monarch was to create alters in people in order to make the subjects controllable by suppressing the original personality and creating an alter which they were able to control and condition, often via electroshock, and they would be able to update their programming via a whole bunch of occultic imagery that, because they were the CIA, they were slipping into a whole bunch of popular media. And indeed, Dylan Grove kind of talks about the idea that people are putting this imagery into their YouTube videos unbeknownst to them.
Apparently, Stephen King books are full of this sort of imagery, which is possibly fair. But apparently, other media that reinforce this programming, basically all of the Disney films, E.T., Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Trances 2.
Yeah, now I was
not Trances 1.
Trances. Now, most of you probably don't even know about the Trances series of films. Josh and I, of course, as devotees of VHS,
as Gen Xers
very aware of the Trances films.
Grew up watching crappy budget movies from rented from the local video library, watching them on VHS.
In the wee hours of the morning, old tapes. It was sometimes almost impossible to watch. Actually, did you watch the most recent Trances film? Because I did make one a few years ago.
No, I stopped.
I mean, in the same respect that Don Mancini, who did the Phantasm films, allowed someone to make a kind of official fan fiction Final Phantasm film. Somehow the guy behind Trances allowed someone to make a really, really cheap Trances film. And I saw the trailer and went, that does not look at all good. And also, actually, many of the Trances films after about Trances 2 look good at all, but this was particularly bad. But for some reason...
That's a deep cut, anyway.
It is, yeah. I mean,
in amongst Ghostbusters and E.T. and Batman.
You've also, you've got Batman, Bewitched, Fantasy Island, Reboot. Classic. Now, there is a good show. Although, actually, I can understand how Reboot is filled with occultic imagery. They did an entire episode devoted to The Prisoner.
Yes.
Which is absolutely astounding.
Another one with a whole Evil Dead thing as well.
Tiny Toons,
old
DuckTales.
One?
Well, actually, the time this was written had to be the old one. DuckTales, not DuckTales, woohoo, DuckTales as in the tales of ducks.
The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Now, that is not, as far as I'm aware, a pop
Maybe they
culture.
mean references to it elsewhere.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm not even aware that they've made a TV series out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Also, it'd be a really boring TV series. If you've ever read the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's not exactly compelling.
Not a
reading.
lot going on. But yeah, so I mean, these are so it's everywhere essentially. These things reinforcing the programming that's been instilled in people by Project Monarch, and the long and the short of it is that this is the program that Groves claims to have been subjected to.
Yes, and as I said at the top of this little discussion about Project Monarch, this appears to be fairly standard anti-Catholic propaganda, because they talk throughout about the way the Catholic Church is involved in this particular program. They intimate that the Catholic Church is not particularly good. I should point out this is not Groves we're talking about here. We're talking about another reference to Project Monarch we found outside of Groves' work. So this is a long-form document describing how Project Monarch works. And it just appears to be ye bog-standard anti-Catholic propaganda, which was fairly common in the US in the 19th century and early 20th century, and has persisted in amongst certain Pentecostal denominations, as evidenced by all those tracks by Jack Chick.
And Monarch had numerous levels of programming. You've got an alpha, a beta, a delta, a theta, an omega, and a gamma. No sigma, though. Have you heard about the sigma male?
No, what is the sigma male?
A sigma male is basically, because the whole alpha beta male nonsense. Somebody came up with the idea. Basically, it was like, I want to be an alpha, but I'm not your sort of jockey, outgoing, sportsy, athletic type. And so they thought up a different kind of alpha male, which is the introvert, cool, calm, and collected alpha male type. Apparently, John Wick is the exemplar of this, and referred to that as a sigma male. So it's basically another way for incels to claim to be alpha males, despite not displaying any of the properties usually associated with alpha males. Anyway, it's completely irrelevant. Monarch doesn't have a sigma, to its detriment. But a lot of these programmings, Delta is the killer programming. Supposedly, it sounds like you're.
Well, it's named after Delta Force.
Delta Force sounds like your Manchurian Candidate style thing. I was going to say. There's Omega is a self-destruct form of programming, which basically forces people to become self-harming or suicidal, which is basically activated, I guess, if they know too much or look like they might be getting out of the program or something.
I like the description of gamma. Another form of system protection is through deception programming, which elicits misinformation and misdirection. This level is intertwined with demonology and tends to regenerate itself at a later time if inappropriately deactivated.
Inappropriately, so by the whole going to therapy and recovering your memories thing. I see.
Presumably, and then the demon reasserts itself.
Yep, so there's a lot going on there. We could go over a lot of the stuff we talked about in the first episode, but maybe we shouldn't repeat ourselves. You can just go back and listen to that if you want. We should probably talk more about where it's at today. So Dylan Groves' YouTube channel is still up and going. They're putting out videos on a fairly regular basis. A lot of singing. A lot of the videos are of Dylan singing a song, which is nice.
Yeah. And then occasionally videos with trigger warnings as they talk about what they've recently discovered whilst being high on marijuana.
Although actually even the singing songs are always referred to as Monarch Survivor Sings, whatever song they happen to be singing at that time. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, they're not slowing down. But yeah, the QAnon stuff, which we never really drew any sort of connection to last time. I think we do need to talk about that a bit. I mean, right back at the beginning, when I was talking about what you find if you go searching for Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory on Google, one of the few results that isn't a link to our old podcast episode is from a website called the Orion Lines by a guy who apparently, quote-unquote, solved the Nazca lines and renamed them the Orion Lines. And it's one of those websites. There's a lot going on that website, but it has a page specifically devoted to Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, but then it just talks about everything Pizzagate shows up. Apparently Pizzagate was covered up because James Alefantis is actually James Rothschild. Who's James Alefantis?
I have no idea.
But they were a Rothschild anyway.
It's one of those things I probably should know. So as you talk, I'll check to find out who James Alefantis
This person
is.
on their site also says CERN is a stellar doorway to the Satanic force, the Orion group.
Well, everyone knows that.
Is something to do with their lines. And a classic a little bit further. This is still all just on the page that starts talking about Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory.
All right. So
okay.
All right. So James Alefantis. This is Wikipedia. James Alefantis is the American chef and restaurateur. He founded and owns two restaurants in Washington D.C., including the pizzeria Comet Ping Pong, and the American restaurant Buck's Fishing and Camping.
Okay, right. So apparently he's actually a secret Rothschild.
And indeed, if you actually just do a search for James Alefantis, the autocomplete is James Alefantis Rothschild or James Alefantis Podesta.
Why do all your favourite stars look like shit? Because Trump ended their adrenochrome supply. These people are sick. So, I mean, yeah, this is essentially a page of someone who's promoting every angle on the QAnon style conspiracy theory imaginable,
and you can kind of see why, because given that one of the central tenets of QAnon has been stopping child trafficking and getting rid of the global pedophile elite, Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory fits into this perfectly because it's both a child trafficking and paedophilia farm.
Run by the global elite.
Yes, so you would, if you were someone who was interested in QAnon, want to incorporate a story like this into your corpus if you thought it was reasonable.
And maybe I suppose we should round things out by addressing, first of all, do we believe in Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say no.
I'm going to go and say no. Yes, I mean I don't. It's one person talking on YouTube. Now I've looked at a few of the videos. There are a lot of comments about I'm a body language expert and I can tell this person isn't lying. To which some people say, well, that just means they believe what they're saying. It could still not be true.
Yeah.
And to which I say, no, you bloody can't. Anyone who says they can easily tell when people are lying is wrong because you can't.
It's like, I mean,
studies have shown that.
But it's like the classic case of TERFs who go, I can just tell by looking at someone whether they're biologically male or female, and then you put 4 pictures up on a screen and go, right, so can you point out who the transgender person in this photo is? Oh, it's obviously that person. No, you're wrong. It's all of them or none of them. And no, you're just trying to form a case. No, you claim that you can just spot these things by looking at photos, or these people can say they can read someone's body language by looking at a video. It's a case of no, because it's bunk science. It's not even real.
Yeah, so I mean, it's all of this stuff. As we've seen in things like the talk of targeted individuals and so on, it sounds like either the cynical reading of it would be it's all just a bit of a LARP, and this is just a story that they're spinning for attention or whatever. The more sympathetic reading would be that this person does actually believe it, but it's a result. It certainly sounds like, as do the targeted individual types, sounds consistent with some form of mental illness. They do claim to have this polyfragmented dissociative disorder, or dissociative identity disorder, which is a little bit controversial in terms of the medicine, I believe.
Yes, let's just say, the medical stuff and the psychological stuff here is very, very contentious as to whether DID actually does exist. There are a lot of arguments even within the literature about the reality of this apparent disorder. So we aren't going to make any comment there as to whether we think this person has DID or doesn't have DID, because we are not medical professionals.
We are not.
What we can say is that the recovered memory aspect of this story is the thing which makes it really, really suspicious. This is not a case of someone who has diary entries detailing these events as they occurred at the time. This is someone who has recovered memories of these events and continues to recover memories of these events now. And if you know anything about recovered memory syndrome, you'll be aware that it is very, very contentious, in the sense that most medical professionals do not think that recovered memories work in the way that they've been described here. And most of these things are more due to these beliefs being reinforced by people who support the idea that memories are being recovered than they are supporting the idea that there are memories literally being recovered from the subconscious.
So no, we're not convinced by the story of Dylan Groves. And I suppose the other thing we need to address is, are we being paid to say this by global elite cabals and their horrible snuff-funded blood money?
And the answer is not yet.
Not yet. The answer, I wish we were being paid to say this, for goodness sake. I mean, I said at the start, we're nobody, and that's pretty much true. We are two people in New Zealand. These accents are real. On the other side of the planet from where all of this is happening, we have an interest in the area, but we aren't actually don't have a, what do we say? We don't have a dog in this game.
I mean, you say we're nobody, but I'm actually a well-respected scholar on
you are
conspiracy
a well-respected
theories.
scholar on conspiracy theories, yes. But in terms of, I suppose, investigating global pedophile elites,
that's true.
That's true. Neither of us.
Although I have been approached several times by TV production companies who've wanted me to be involved in their kind of travelogue shows where people go around investigating things. It just turns out that none of these shows have eventuated. So it's possible I could have been a contender. I could have been a player, Joshua.
But no.
No.
Here we sit. And I guess that's all we have to say. That's the state of things with Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory. And basically we're going to put this episode up on YouTube as well, and maybe get a whole bunch more. Let's be honest, that's really why we're doing this, just to see if we can get more comments on account of we appear to be the only place to go for commentary on Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory.
That is part of it. I mean, one part of it was I was quite curious to know whether there was something we missed out in the previous discussion. And I do think the discussion around Killeen, Texas is kind of interesting.
There's some stuff going on there.
Once you actually put Killeen, Texas, the location, into the discussion, I think it makes sense as to why people treat Groves' story slightly more seriously. Because once you see the Vanessa Gillen stuff, and you see the fact that people have been arrested for child prostitution, and you see there's an unusual number of deaths going on at Fort Hood every year, we end up going, well, there is weird stuff going on in Killeen, Texas. Why think it's odd to think this additional weird thing isn't going on? Or why think it's odd that it is going on? So I can kind of understand why people are going, you're missing out the crucial context here. I'd simply point out that A, most of these events with respect to the child prostitution ring and the death of Vanessa Gillen occurred well after the fact. In fact, in both cases, they occurred after we had discussed the story of Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory. So you can't really backport that stuff and go, oh, you missed out this crucial context of something which you'd have to be a fortune teller to be able to tell was there. It is true that Fort Hood seems to have a major leadership issue, which is leading to a massive deaths on site, which is just indescribably traumatic. But I don't think it lends credence to the idea that there's a literal snuff factory located underneath Killeen, Texas, where children are boiling each other alive to eat.
Yeah, no. So I think that's where we'll leave it. Now, if you want to, I say we're not being paid to say this. We're not really, but we do receive some small amount of money from our beloved patrons, basically enough to cover our hosting costs and occasionally buy nice gear. And being our lovely patrons, they get bonus episodes, and they're going to get one this week because they do every week.
Yes, this week they're going to hear about how a bot on Twitter predicted QAnon a year before it came into existence.
I'm really
Still not bored of
sick
that
of
bot.
it.
Yeah, no, not at all. And we're
It's gonna happen,
also going to be talking about Russia engaging in a bit of the good old interference, this time about the COVID-19 vaccines.
Those wacky scamps. Yes, so if you'd like to be a patron, if you'd like to hear this episode, simply go to patreon.com and look for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. If you are a patron, well, then my work here is done. And if you don't want to become a patron, but you're still listening to this after we've spent a good sort of 45 minutes bagging a theory that you probably came here to hear us supporting, well, that's fine anyway, because you're our audience, and audiences are just grand.
You are. You're lovely. I mean, not as sparkly and superior as a patron, but you're still pretty damn good. And I don't use such strong language lightly.
Powerful stuff. So to all of you, each and every one of you, I think the time has simply come to say goodbye.
And I shall now activate the Omega personality.
The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy is Josh Addison and me, Dr. M.R.X. Dentith. You can contact us at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com, and please do consider supporting the podcast via our Patreon.
And remember, they're coming to get you, Barbara.